Probably will be able to cover 2 chapters today once again. So, Chapter 23, Hope's Defiance. At Hope's shining arrival, the men's wounds had stopped bleeding. The remaining enemy soldiers, on seeing their leader fall, had fled in fear. They would not dare to challenge any power that could defeat one of the Dachmanim. As Hope clung to Alva, some of the men began to come too. Bonson sat up, looked around him, and wept. Prior heard him weeping and dragged his gigantic frame, wounded and exhausted, over to sit next to him. He put his gigantic arm around Bonson's shoulders, giving what comfort friendship could provide. Bonson put his head against the gigantic shoulder and continued to weep. He had not stood till the end. He had given in to fear. It took Hellel and Nera a good deal longer than Hope to reach the lake. In her urgency, she ran the entire way at a sprint. Though they were eager to get there, the best they could do was jog or walk. When they reached the doorway to the lake, they could piece together the scenario very quickly. They were glad to see Hope alive, but this was tempered with their sadness for her grief, as well as their own grief for Alva. They let her be for a while as they checked the other men. Hope's radiance had caused even the worst wounds to stop bleeding. Most of the 9 warriors were severely wounded, but they were alive. The 6 warriors who had kept their feet had kept the enemy soldiers from finishing their job. Many of the men had been on death's doorstep when Hope arrived, but the power of the Lascinet had a strong remedial effect. Pincer had noticed Hope's gift for healing after their first skirmish. At that time she was rattled and nervous. With her full power revealed, the effect was much stronger. When Hellel and Nera had bandaged the warriors and given them water, they finally approached Hope, who was still clinging to Alva. "Hope?" said Hellel gently. She did not move or answer. "Hope?" he said again. She still did not answer. "Hope, it's time to get up." "No!" Hope shouted through her tears without even lifting her head. "Hope," Nera said with loving gentleness. "No!" Hope interrupted without even letting her finish. "Hope," Nera said more gently, "you need to get up." "No!" "Darling, you need to get off of him." "No! I will not! Now leave me alone!" Nera surveyed the situation carefully, thinking what to do. Hellel was about to speak again, but Nera put up her hand, signaling him to let her handle the situation. After carefully observing Hope clinging to Alva, she spoke with a little more force. "Hope!" "No!" Hope shouted again. "Hope, he's breathing." "No!" "What?" "He's breathing. But he won't be for long if you don't stop squeezing him so tight." Hope raised her head to look at Alva. He had not been breathing the last time she looked at him, but Nera was right. He was barely breathing, but he was breathing. "He's alive!" she shouted as her countenance assumed a fresh, blinding light. Alva's breathing grew a little stronger, but he remained unconscious. They dabbed water on his lips periodically to keep him hydrated. Traveling on that night was out of the question. They were all exhausted and most were wounded. Though Alva was alive, he was in a delirious fever. They set up a rough camp far enough from the battle scene to be comfortable and had a supper of dried fruit, meat, and biscuits, and finally got their much needed sleep. Hope did not sleep. Tired as she was, she stayed up all night mopping Alva's head with cold water and singing to him softly. She was now composing her own songs about him, her and him, and their future children who she began to see running around in her mind again. Though Alva remained ill and unconscious, Hope's songs replaced troubled dreams of darkness, cold, and fear with dreams about hope and babies. A week earlier, his unconscious mind would have been wondered if he were allowed to have such dreams. Now it was not up to him. Chapter 24. The Separatists. The next morning they had to be on their way. This was complicated because Alva was still in a delirium and most of the soldiers were still wounded. No limbs had been severed and no bones were damaged, however, and Hope's remedial effects made it so that all of them could walk. With effort, they could even carry their packs, and the stream was still flowing, so there would be plenty of water for a while. The greatest difficulty was how to bring Alva with them. He would apparently survive, but the effects of the Dark Warrior's power, which had been concentrated on him so strongly for so long, would take some time to heal. Feverish though he was, his right arm, which had stabbed the warrior's heart, was still deadly chill. Hope held his hand in hers as often as she could, trying to warm it and counteract these effects. Their solution was to make a stretcher. They still had plenty of rope and were able to cut branches. Jagrok and Hellel were both skilled at this kind of thing. The stretcher would not be overly comfortable, but if Alva were conscious, he certainly would prefer it to being left behind. So Keel joked anyway. Pryor had received many small wounds, but none of them were bad ones. With sufficient food and water, his unbelievable strength had returned. He volunteered to carry one side of the stretcher for the rest of the journey, or at least until Alva woke up. The other side was taken in shifts by Pintor, Bonson, Keel, and Hellel. The former three had manageable wounds, and Hellel had none. Now that the battle was over, and they had won against all odds, some of the men talked about it. It was the stuff of legends. They were all very proud to have been there, though they still felt the remnants of the Dark Warrior's terror. Bonson, however, was silent in these discussions. Though he had fought better than most men in history, he could not feel proud. At the last he had given in to fear. Once again, Alva had been put on display for all to see as the best man. This was the way Bonson saw it, anyway. The other men soon gained some sensitivity to this, and they began to talk of other things. Bonson no longer felt any superiority over the other men, so he was able to talk with them as friends. They asked him many questions about his family lineage, his life as a Lacinian noble, and the many tournaments he had won. He had actually had a very interesting life. His father was a diplomat rather than a warrior, but he had indulged his son's fancies. At Bonson's request, his father's wealth had given him the best sword and lance trainers in the kingdom. He had spent his boyhood practicing these skills for endless hours. One was not allowed to enter the tournaments until reaching adulthood at 16. By this time, Bonson had become so skillful that he had won the sword and lance events in his first tournament and in every other tournament since then. Their progress was slow. There was a path leading off the ravine that took them in the general direction they needed to go. They didn't think they needed to have much concern for the other 100 soldiers who had been waiting at the Lukon Lake. They would have no Dark Warrior to lead them. They did not know what they would do, but it seemed unlikely that they would pursue them into the forest if they found out their leader had fallen. Water was not hard to find in the forest, and there were squirrels for Chad to shoot, so they had plenty to eat. Though most of Philor's cooking gear had been left behind, they would roast the meat on sticks and make do well enough. This was the most pleasant traveling they had done for weeks, despite their wounds and the fact that Alva had to be carried. The second day travel was even smoother. They were all feeling much better, and the road was flat and cool from the trees of the forest. There was some concern for Alva, who was still in his fever. In his rare occasions of delirious semi-consciousness, they were out of this state soon. Hope began to feel a faint fear that she might lose him after all. Hellel and Nira had the same thought, but they kept it to themselves and pressed on in their travel. When they rested for lunch, Bonson was away by himself, as he would often be during the rests. It was pure torture for him to sit in the same circle with Hope, who would never be his and whose mind was filled with concern for Alva. He would almost rather have faced the Dark Warrior again. Prior and Bonson had become friends now. In fact, Prior was probably the best friend he had ever had besides his sword instructors. Prior genuinely admired Bonson's courage and skill in battle, and thought he had a fine personality when he finally decided to share it. He did not like to see his friend so sad, so he decided to brave a conversation with him about it. "Lord Bonson," he said, "can I ask you something?" "Go ahead, my friend," Bonson said quietly. He had a pretty good idea what Prior wanted to talk about. "Well, and I'm sorry if this is too much to talk about, just say so if it is, but to me it seems obvious that Alva and Hope were somehow meant for each other. It's nothing against you. There's just something about the two of them, something almost magical. It was there even before Alva knew it. If you love Hope, it seems like you would want her to be happy, and she seems so happy with Alva. She could light up a city street when he's around. Wouldn't things be better for you if you just counted your losses and tried to be happy for them? It seems to me you could have just about any other lady in the world." Bonson smiled at the irony of this last statement. "The problem," he said, "is that I don't want any other lady in the world." "But with time you might." "Have you ever been in love, Prior?" Bonson asked. "Lots of times. Never stuck, though." "I have never loved anyone but Hope," Bonson explained. "Beautiful women have been throwing themselves in my path since before I was a man. I really enjoyed some of their company, but I never really cared for any of them. I loved Hope more than life itself the moment I saw her. I may try to be happy for her, but without her there is no life for me. I had hoped to prove I was at Alva's equal at the stand. I didn't think she would want me over him because of it, but what did that matter? We were both going to die anyway. If we had, I would have nothing to be sad about now. If we had both stood to the end, I would have something to take with me. As it was, I cowered and he stood. I have nothing left now." "The thing is," Prior replied, "you and me are Lacinians. I know you're only half by blood, but it's your home same as mine. As Lacinians, we understand what it means that Alva is a Danae. If a man compares himself to a Danae, he'll never measure up. It's not a fair comparison. When I found out who he really was, it made me feel a lot better about the schooling he gave me the day we met." "That may be true, Prior, but several months ago I would have responded by saying, 'I am Lord Bonson, and no one is better than me. Alva Danae has never competed with me, and yet he has always defeated me. I don't have your humility and grace. I am what I am. And what I am is stripped down to nothing. My attitude might not be right, but that really doesn't concern me. From now on, my life is a shadow. I'm done. Prior could see that it was not the time to press this any further. Bonson did not want to find peace about this. It seemed that his one comfort was in refusing to be comforted. When the lunch rest was over, they continued on. After a few more hours of walking, they heard the sound of horses galloping on the trail ahead. They had had so many unwanted surprises on this journey that it was not difficult to believe that somehow an enemy might have gotten ahead of them. They knew that they were not in any condition for a fight, but they put down their packs and Alva's stretcher and drew their swords and axes. Suddenly, 4 men on white horses came into view. They were tall, with blonde hair and fair skin. 2 of them had eyes of deep blue, very much like Hope's. One of them had eyes of bright green and one of pale lavender. The last man particularly caught their gaze because no one had ever seen eyes of that color. They relaxed at once and lowered their weapons. Pardon me. These were obviously remnants of the Lacenae from Lasse Creston. When the strangers saw Hope, they had a knowing look like they had found what they were looking for. In point of fact, they had. When Hope faced the Dark Warrior at the dry lake, her light had been seen all over southeastern Lacenea, but the inhabitants there simply assumed it was some unexplained natural phenomenon. It had also been seen in Lasse Creston, and the inhabitants there knew exactly what it was, though none of them had seen it before. They sent groups of riders to find the luminary who produced it and bring him or her back to Lasse Creston, if possible. After a moment of the 2 parties staring at one another, Hellel addressed them in the High Lacenaean. I am called Hellel, a friend of the Lady Lorraine of the House of Farron. This lady is called Hope. She is the Lady Lorraine's only daughter. Dachmanim have returned to Lacenaean in an attempt to take life. We seek shelter at Lasse Creston. The men were filled with awe. They dismounted for a closer look at Hope and then conversed with Hellel. He told them of everything that had happened in the many season changes since they had had contact with the House of Farron. As he told his tale, they were more and more amazed. So much of the history they knew was coming alive before their eyes. Not only was Hope the last of the House of Farron, she was also a descendant of Daivan the Great through her father. Also, the Dark Warrior had been slain by the only living heir of Mancher, or Alcela the First. After some deliberation, they determined their immediate course of action. For their safety, Alva and Hope would be taken to Lasse Creston immediately. They made a wider and more comfortable stretcher for Alva, which they placed on long branches between 2 of the well-trained horses. These would be led by one of the men on horseback, and Hope would ride the 4th horse. The other 3 men from Lasse Creston would remain behind to show the company the way. They had just come from Lasse Creston and knew there was no danger ahead. When the horses reached the settlement, horses would be sent back for all of them. This gave one of the men, the one with lavender eyes, the chance to converse with Hope. The other 3 could ask Hellel the many questions his story had raised. Until tomorrow, my friends.